Let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're exploring the 19th century American Industrial Revolution. But we're not talking about tycoons or politicians. We're getting right down to ground level with one resilient couple, Edward and Sophia Newton Hildreth. We're going to trace their marriage, their family life, and their career progression right against the dramatic backdrop of industrialization in Massachusetts.
So you might be wondering, how did one ordinary family actually navigate the dawn of the Industrial Revolution? We hear so much about massive factories and booming economic trends, right? But instead of looking at dry statistics, we're going to explore this massive societal shift through the deeply human, highly documented lives of the Hildreths. It's just a much more relatable way to see history unfold.
All right, Section 1, Early Life in Massachusetts.
Okay, so both Edward and Sophia were born into this rapidly changing New England landscape in the early 1830s. Edward was born in 1831 in Townsend, Massachusetts, a town still very much rooted in traditional agriculture. Sophia, on the other hand, was born 3 years later in Springfield, Vermont. And while Edward's early years were pretty stable, Sophia's childhood was immediately marked by hardship. Her biological father actually died before she was even born, leading to her mother's quick remarriage, which, was a very common, pragmatic necessity for survival for women back then.
Moving right along to Section 2, A Christmas Marriage.
On December 25, 1852, 21-year-old Edward, who was already making a living as a comb maker, married 18-year-old Sophia in Northborough, Massachusetts. Now, a Christmas wedding might sound super romantic to us today, but winter weddings were actually really practical in agrarian New England communities. There was just less farm work to do. Still, this ceremony marked the true beginning of an incredible 47-year partnership.
Now take a second to think about this. 17 years. That is a massive gap between the birth of their first daughter, Hattie, in 1857, and the arrival of their son, Clarence, in 1874. When we see a gap like this in historical family records, it speaks volumes. It heavily hints at the unspoken emotional and physical realities of 19th century family planning, pointing to possible unrecorded losses, miscarriages, or health struggles that families quietly endured during this era.
Let's jump to Section 3, the comb-making industry.
This is absolutely fascinating because Edward's professional journey literally maps the macro shift of the entire American economy just through one man's resume. In 1850, he's a clerk, which required basic reading and math. By 1852, he pivots to become a comb maker, a specialized craft working with animal horn. And then, by 1870, as industrialization really explodes, he adapts again to become a machinist. His career perfectly mirrors the nation's journey from agriculture to specialized crafts, and finally to heavy, mechanized factory production.
And as Edward's career advanced, his standing in society totally solidified. This 1865 census designation is a fantastic historical detail. He's listed as a rateable Pole and legal voter. Achieving this official status meant he was fully engaged in the civic life of his community. He wasn't just a transient worker anymore. He transitioned into an established, property-owning citizen with full civic rights and an actual voice in his local government.
If we look at the years between 1860 and 1870, a super clear narrative of upward mobility emerges. In 1860, the Hildreths had a modest $500 in personal property. Fast forward a decade to 1870, they kept that $500, but added a massive $2,000 in real property. To put that into perspective, in the mid-19th century, holding $2,000 in real estate proves the family has successfully locked in solid middle-class status and the financial security of homeownership.
Which brings us to Section 4, Triumph and Heartbreak.
They eventually settled in Leominster, Massachusetts, proudly known as the Pioneer Plastic City because of its booming celluloid comb industry. Their geographic center was 149 Lancaster Street, and this was actually that $2,000 real estate asset we just talked about. As their family grew, they quite literally added an extension onto the house for their daughter Hattie when she married, just so they could keep everyone close under one roof.
So by 1880, that house on Lancaster Street was a bustling, multi-generational household. You've got Edward and Sophia in their late 40s, Sophia's 84-year-old mother, their daughter Hattie, son-in-law Frank, and a young grandson. A full house like this definitely provided economic advantages through shared expenses and a division of labor. But honestly, far more importantly, it provided a tight network of deep emotional support, which they desperately needed after an unimaginable tragedy just 2 years prior.
In 1878, the Hildreths faced their absolute darkest chapter. Their 4-year-old son, Clarence, died from accidental poisoning. It's incredibly heartbreaking.
but openly acknowledging this agonizing reality of 19th century child mortality deeply humanizes the Hildreths for us. It strips away the historical distance and powerfully reminds us just how fragile their world was, a time long before modern medicine, childproofing, and basic safety standards simply existed.
All right, Section 5, a transforming American landscape.
As the 19th century was drawing to a close, Edward's health began to fail. Ironically, right as modern conveniences like early electricity and telephones were taking off in American cities. He suffered from Bright's disease, which was a historical umbrella term for a very painful, debilitating kidney disease, and he ultimately passed away from a stroke in 1899. He died just shy of his 68th birthday, leaving Sophia a widow. And without any modern social safety nets, she relied heavily on her daughter's family for support in those later years.
Now, Sophia's immensely long life is almost hard to comprehend. Born in 1834 during the Jacksonian era, she lived through the entire Civil War, rode the economic wave of the celluloid comb boom in the 1870s, and lived all the way to 1920 to witness women's suffrage. Think about that for a second. She went from the era of horse-drawn carriages all the way to seeing women gain the right to vote at the ballot box, before finally passing away in 1923 at the age of 88.
The final chapter of Sophia's remarkable story is actually written in her estate, which was valued at just over $6,500. Because she somehow outlived both her daughter and her son-in-law, she left this substantial, hard-earned estate directly to her grandsons, Harry and Frederick Seaver. The bulk of it was split evenly between them in cash, with meticulous amounts reserved for funeral expenses, perpetual cemetery care, and taxes. And empowered by that inheritance, those grandsons continued the family legacy in the local comb and button industries.
Today, the Hildreth family gravestone stands in Evergreen Cemetery, silently memorializing Edward, Sophia, and the devastating early loss of little Clarence. It's a simple, enduring piece of granite, but it serves as a really poignant physical reminder of a resilient family whose personal triumphs, incredible career pivots, and deep personal tragedies played out right alongside the birth of modern America.
So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a provocative question. By looking through the lens of one specific ordinary family like the Hildreths, how does your perspective on sweeping historical eras change? Because to me, their story absolutely proves that history isn't just about massive factories and textbook dates. It's about everyday people, the comb makers, the machinists, the mothers, and the resilient families who adapted, survived, and quietly paved the way for the world we live in today. Thanks for exploring this with me.